Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the ConTinual Comics Lair for our discussion of DC Comics character, the Spectre. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott, and we'll start, as we so often do, with asking the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us when they first discovered the Spectre, and a little bit about themselves as well. John, will you start?
Hey, John L. French. I am a retired crime scene investigator, having done about 37 years on the streets of Baltimore and lived to tell about it. I'm a writer of crime, horror, pulp, basically whatever the editor asked me to write. My first encounter was the Spectre. Was shortly after I got back into comics. Following the Batman The Dark Knight series. I started reading Batman comics exclusively, and the Spectre must have appeared in one of the Batman comics because I started, reading what I could of the Spectre, going back and picking up back issues. I think the first actual Spectre comics I read were from the great adventure, adventure series by Fleischer and Aparo.
Okay. Fraser, what about you?
Okay, my first encounter goes back to the Silver Age when I was still a kid. Okay, to give some backstory, in the early 60s, Julius Schwartz, one of DC's great editors, had brought back the Golden Age heroes, establishing that they existed on a parallel world from the Silver Age heroes. In 1965, he tried seeing if the Golden Age heroes could get their own series rather than just guest starring. He tried Dr. Fate and Hourman as a team. 2 issues of a tryout magazine didn't work. Black Canary and Starman didn't work. Michael Uslan, who would later go on to produce the Tim Burton Batman movies, wrote in to Julius Schwartz and said, "Hey, you've been reviving Golden Age heroes. How about the Spectre?" "Kid, he's a ghost. I don't think the Comics Code allows it." "Casper the Friendly Ghost is Comics Code approved." "You're right. Okay, look for the Spectre teamed with Dr. Midnight." Fortunately, given the massive power disparity, Dr. Midnight was dropped from the proposal. The Spectre got 3 issues in Showcase in 66 and became a hit. I came in with the second one, which has a cover where someone who looks rather like Satan is hitting the Spectre over the head with the Earth, which is a rather striking image. It's on the astral plane. It's only an astral counterpart of Earth, so we were all fine. It is a wild story, and I have been following him off and on ever since.
Well, you left out the part about who are you?
Oh, yes, I'm Fraser Sherman, freelance writer, historical fantasy writer.
Okay. Mickey?
Mickey Dubrow. I am retired from 30 years of writing for television, and now I write different kinds of books. I have a dystopian thriller, a young adult time travel. I'm trying to get a urban fantasy, traditional Jewish magic book done. I first discovered the Spectre in the 70s when I was buying a lot of comic books as a teenager, and it was the Michael Fleischer and Jim Aparo. And it was my first. Also, I'll usually follow artists more than I did writers, but this one clued in on both of them, and I really loved Jim Aparo's artwork. And I just got into the whole idea of the Spectre starting then.
And those of you who are regulars here know that I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books. I also independently publish several different kinds of romance. And with Jeannie Adams, I write the Outcast Station science fiction series. I actually do not know much about the Spectre, so I'm looking forward to learning a lot from the panelists tonight. I know who he is. I know the name Jim Corrigan. I have a vague idea of what he does. So this will be a learning experience for me, and so maybe it will be for others who are watching it as well. And if anybody is new to the Spectre, I'm going to toss out what I learned about his origin today in preparing for the panel. And if that's not entirely correct, I'm trusting somebody on the panel will correct it. The Spectre made his debut in More Fun Comics number 52 in February 1940. In a story written by Joe Siegel, whose name you may recognize from the Superman history, a hard-boiled police officer, Jim Corrigan, on the way to a party with his fiancée, was murdered, was refused entrance to the afterlife, and was sent back to Earth to eliminate evil. Does that about sum it up as far as...
It's Jerry Siegel, but yes.
It is Jerry Siegel. Yeah, thank you.
That sums it up.
Yes, well, I actually wrote Joe in my notes, so it's good that you all corrected it. Is it fair to say, from your reading of the Spectre, that he was born in vengeance?
Yes, I think so. I just reread the first couple of stories of the Golden Age Spectre, and he did want to, he did want at least to get back at the criminals who dumped him in a 50-gallon drum of cement, threw him in the harbor, and their last words were they were going to go visit his fiancée. So he also wanted to protect her. So since he wasn't allowed into heaven, that became his mission, to fight evil, starting with those people. And he decided, he decided that he would, call himself the Spectre and wear this ghost-like costume and, Batman, forgive me, strike fear into the hearts of the humans.
What about... So that doesn't sound like he had all the powers he later came to have.
He did pretty much. Minor point, it's not really a ghost-like costume. That is his white, corpse-like flesh under the green hood and the green trunks. But yeah, he had amazing powers and could pretty much do anything, although when he was in a Justice Society story, he usually hit people just to spread this. But yes, he has always been cosmically powerful.
Mickey, did you want to add anything to what they've just said?
I just liked how the stories were, they reminded me of the Twilight Zone, and that it was that instant karma, that idea that we all have, that when we feel powerless. And it was great to have this character with unlimited power who could just immediately make someone pay for the terrible things they did, all the things we wish we could make bad guys suffer. So I like the creative ways he kept, killing these people. He just did, he could have just simply made someone drop dead, but no, he had to really make it nasty. And I thought that was very creative.
Well, his object all sublime, he did achieve in time. He made the punishment fit the crime.
Yeah.
Well, that actually leads right into my next question is, what do you like about the Spectre? So before I move on, Mickey, do you want to add anything, or did you just cover it?
No, that was pretty much it. That just, I like that he was able to do that. It was that visceral thrill, but also it was the creative ways they came up with. I know at the time there was some controversy about it, like, kids shouldn't be reading this, but I read it as a kid and it didn't ruin me much.
Okay. John, what about you?
I liked the whole, as Mickey said, instant vengeance. Now, like I said, my first real exposure was the Flesh Up Arrows, and in that he was like just about any other, crime fighter at the time. He appeared as a mortal as Jim Corrigan, and he would, find an excuse to shift into the Spectre form and then mete out justice according to, the nature of the crime. I mean, he would turn people in, and this, there's going to be spoilers, but if you haven't read these yet, this might entice you to do it. He would turn people he turned somebody into wood and threw them into a buzzsaw. He turned a swami, as the person was called, into glass, and when the swami fell over, shattered. Then there's the incident with the giant rubber duck. But you have to read that to believe it. Well, you don't believe it, but you have to read it to appreciate it. And, you know, I was already on this Batman, you know, where Batman is literally kicking the hell out of the bad guys. And then there was Justice League, because Batman was in it. And the whole idea of this supernatural appealed to me. And later, I mean, there were some Spectre series I did not like. Fraser, forgive me, I really didn't like the 1967 Spectre series, because it was mostly the Spectre fighting supernatural menaces. And Lord knows we have to pay for that. And then it went on and off. The Spectre who appeared in Adventure Comics was in a way kind of like the TV version of the Hawk, because toward the end there was this reporter trying to track him down. And later, that reporter, in a series called Ghost, that reporter morphed into Dr. Terrence 13, who was trying to track him down. You know, so I like the whole idea of, karmic vengeance as a thing. So that's what I initially liked about the Spectre. Later, we can discuss the later, pardon the pun, incarnations later.
Right. Fraser, what do you like about the Spectre?
For the Silver Age, the first couple of stories had a kind of sweeping cosmic feel, but then they ran into the problem that he is so powerful that the authors would really have to pull a lot of strings to explain how anyone could go up against him and hold their own. And even as a kid, that was an obvious flaw. They do, however, and it's worse reading them as an adult, but they do have Murphy Anderson, who is one of my favorite art on the early stories. Then they had some guy whom I hated at the time. His name was Neil Adams, and his art was so icky, but reading it now, I appreciate that possibly my taste as a kid was not good. And he did marvelous, rather Steve Ditko on Doctor Strange work. The 70s version, well, there's Jim Apato's art, and there is as my co-panelists have said, the strange horror of watching him get creative in killing these people. Normally, I hate superheroes who kill, and he came out before the Punisher had even killed anybody, even though he'd appeared already. I think it works with the Spectre because he is obviously not basing it on a study of the evidence. He's getting guidance from God, so he's not getting it wrong. And B, to some extent, it's a horror as much as a superhero story. And terrible things happening to bad people in horror is an established storytelling tradition. And the Fleischer-Aparo run is as much definitive as any comic book run. Everything since then has either been reacting against it or imitating it. The John Ostrander, Tom Mandrake run of the 1990s does a brilliant job looking at it, asking, why would God set the Spectre to do this? Why is the Spectre doing it? And exploring the whole concept in amazing ways. So I like that one for entirely different reasons.
Okay. Well, since you've mentioned several different runs, what's your favorite run?
I love the Fleischer-Aparo Spectre, but I think I would go with the Ostrander Mandrake. It is so thoughtful. It is so creative. It is tackling religion and ethics and questions, and with occasional errors, 90% of the time it hits its mark, and that's pretty rare.
Okay. Mickey, what's your favorite run?
Well, always the Fleischer and Jim Aparo, but I only recently read the Will Pfeiffer Cliff, I'm going to say his name wrong, Chang, where they had Crispin Allen taking over as the Spectre. And what I loved about that series was how much Crispin just really questioned what is this guy, and really was like insulting him, going, so you make ironic deaths. What's the purpose of that? Why are you doing this? And I love that they broke it down and said, why do you even exist? And it really kind of played with the nature of vengeance. And I thought that was really clever of them. And the artwork was great.
Okay. John, what's your favorite?
Hey, I'd have to go with Fraser and the Ostrander run. I had just they had the one with I'm going to say his name here, Doug Munch and I think Dean Colin had just ended, and in my opinion, it ended poorly because it left one of the main characters out. One of the first things Ostrander did was saying, "Oh, all that sort of stuff, that was just a dream they had given Corrigan." But I liked it because it explored the nature of the Spectre all the way back into the ultimate origin, and I'm not talking about Jim Corrigan, the origin of the Spectre, who turned out initially to have been Eclipso. And Eclipso was the first vengeance of God, but he was not bound to a human being. And they got into the fact, they talked about the story that's told in the Ten Commandments where, Moses, goes before the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh's chief counselor is some guy named Nabu. So we've got Dr. Fate, and the Spectre turns out to be the angel of death, that took out the firstborn. And, from there on in, he had to be bound to a human being. So there's a whole lot of human beings who have been Spectre. And, there was just great moments in that. I'm going to mention one of my favorite. The Spectre learns that there is this huge building run by the state in which murderers are pending execution. And he's, oh, really? And he said, yeah, well, aren't they being executed? Well, there's a lot of delays. Okay, I can take care of that. And he goes through death row and kills every prisoner on death row except him, because he knows that man is innocent. And and the authorities by now are very well aware of the Spectre. Scared to death, but very well aware. And the authorities say, well, we just can't take your word that he's innocent. He said, okay, you don't have to. He said, but just think about this. I have told you he is innocent. If you execute him, you become a murderer, and I will be coming after you. It was just sort of thing, just taking the, I'm killing murderers, and that basically seemed what his job was. I'm killing murderers, and if you kill deliberately an innocent man, you are a murderer, and I will kill you. I mean, it takes it to the ultimate conclusion, end.
Anybody else want to respond to that?
Well, I agree with John. Like I said, it's a marvelous run. One story which sticks in my mind, there is a priest, a character from Ostrander's Suicide Squad, who is serving as Jim Corrigan's spiritual advisor. And at one point, because dealing with the Spectre, his views have become very unorthodox, so a group of cardinals show up to decide whether he is fit to be a priest, and the Spectre shows up and, I like this man. You do not want to kick him out of the church. I will be angry. And Father Andrew, Spectre, this is a church matter. It is not about me being a bad person. This is about church doctrine. Back off. And Spectre does.
Actually, you mentioned the priest. Some years ago, I was at the Baltimore Comic Con. Ostrander was there signing.
Oh, cool.
So I got my first copy of his Suicide Squad and I signed. I got the first copy of his Spectre signed, because I don't need them all signed, just issue number. And I mentioned how much I liked this priest. He said that character was inspired by two Jesuit priests taught me in college.
Cool.
Cool.
I will say it is a crying shame that only like the first 25 issues of the Ostrander run are out in paperback. It's on the DC app, but I would like it in hard copy.
So would I. I mean, I think that deserves the the deluxe treatment like they gave Starman.
Sure, absolutely.
Mickey, did you want to add anything?
I'm not as familiar with that series, but I just wanted to jump back to something Fraser said, which was that, for a while there, Spectre was more horror than he was superhero. And I'd like that aspect, that when you think about it, it's like he almost isn't a superhero. He's something beyond. So I like the idea that that's a horror idea.
Well, as somebody who's not really familiar with it, it's interesting to me that God and religion are coming up so much in the discussion of this character. And those are all past runs. I think the Ostrander run was in the 90s, if I remember correctly.
It started in 1992.
Yeah. So,
and by the way, it had maybe the best ending of any comic book series I've ever read. And we won't, neither Fraser or I will tell you what it is, because it is, you have to read it for yourself.
Well, I have a soft spot for him because he and the late Kim Yale created Oracle. And so she's one of my favorite ever characters. But I'm just wondering if in today's climate, just take a wild guess, whatever you think. I'm not going to ask you to back it up with anything. Do you think the Spectre could do as well with readers having those religious overtones today as he did back then?
I think, the problem, and it's been mentioned before, the problem with the Spectre is he's just so darned powerful. Mm-hmm. And everything really that can be done with him has been done. The last ongoing appearances of the Spectre in whatever, has either been where you've got somebody like Crispus Allen trying to adjust, taking a year to decide, okay, I'll take the job. Or you have the Spectre suddenly losing his host and going ape crap crazy, and they have to figure out how to stop him. So, how do you stop somebody who's God? And, usually it's Batman should go, because Batman's probably the only person who's not really afraid of the Spectre and has already worked out how to stop him.
It's the Superman problem, just in a different permutation.
Right. And, but they did try a different approach. And, Fraser, should we talk about Hal Jordan?
Yes. Okay, as he is about to bring up...
Mickey, are you going to chime in?
Oh, no, I thought that was such a weird turn. What a bizarre idea, but y'all go ahead. Was a left turn I didn't see coming.
As they establish that the Spectre has had many hosts, eventually he is separated from Bim Corrigan, and a powerful demon, Neron, tries to merge with him. The only the solution the superheroes decide on is get Hal Jordan, who was dead and in purgatory at the time, and merge and have him become the Spectre's host as somebody who has the willpower, hopefully, to rein in the Spectre's destructive impulses. Hal bonds with him and decides to become a spirit of redemption rather than a spirit of vengeance. It's an interesting take. It wasn't always successful in the short run. And then DC decided to go, let's just go back with the classic, and we got Spirit of Vengeance again, and Hal got to be Green Lantern once more.
It was, I didn't like it when it came out, because like everybody, this is not my spec, okay? But when I reread it, I found out once you accept the premise, it's actually a very good book.
Yes.
My favorite one was the Spectre. Hal Jordan had established a headquarters of SWORD in the desert somewhere in Middle America, and his buddies knew he was there, so they decided to throw him a birthday party. And there's the usual, stuff. And at the very end, he sees this one package, and it says, "Happy birthday from Bruce." And he's amazed because he did not even sense Bruce coming in, leaving the package, and leaving. But it was a good series, but it you don't if you read it, don't expect the traditional Spectre. And I think one of the reasons how Jordan became the Spectre is they both look good in green.
It was nice, but this was an era when DC was a little more willing to shake up its casting and its heroes before setting into, yes, everything we did in the Silver Age, let's go back to that. Barbara Gordon should be out of the wheelchair, Hal should be Green Lantern, Barry should be Flash, etc., etc.
I've kind of gotten the impression in the reading I did this afternoon that you all were mentioning the creative and sometimes ironic ways the Spectre would dispatch people, that the violence and the killing in the Spectre may have been an issue in the industry. Is that a correct impression or is that mistaken?
It's hard. I don't know, because I was a kid at the time. I wasn't plugged into fandom, so I cannot answer to that.
I only read about it later. I mean, I read it as a kid, and I didn't think of it as being that violent, but apparently it was a problem.
Yeah, it was enough of a problem is that they actually left 3 Spectre stories unpublished until they put out The Wrath of the Spectre, which was a 4-issue deluxe miniseries, which reprinted all the original stories from Adventure Comics, plus the 3 that hadn't been printed.
Yeah.
And I think they actually continued that concept in a magazine, in a comic called Ghost. I think it was only 3 issues of Ghost, but that's where Dr. Terrence 13, the one and only person in the DC universe who does not believe in true, although his daughter does. And he keeps encountering the Spectre, and he wants to know the truth behind him, and comes off.
Well, because Corrigan was a detective, I'd like that the reporter was also, it became the mystery aspect of it was a lot of fun.
The funny thing is they had Mark Hamill voice the Spectre on a couple of episodes of Batman, the Brave and the Bold, and he gets to kill people the same way, and now it's in a kid's cartoon.
Yeah.
There's one where a scientist using genetically engineered rats to steal, so the Spectre turns him into cheese. After assuring Batman he has nothing to worry about, turns the scientist into cheese, lets the rats out of their cage. Like so many others, your own evil will devour you.
I had to look that one up. The one I saw was where the Spectre basically reveals to Batman who killed his parents, and Bruce. I mean, it works out the same as in the comic, although it's a little less intense. And there's no Spectre in the comic, but it's Batman basically appears before Joe Chill, tells him, "You're going to be arrested for the murder of Martha and Thomas Wayne." And Chill says, "There's no witness, they can't prove anything. There's no witnesses." And Batman pulls off his cowl and goes, "His son saw it all. I am Bruce Wayne." Joe Chill runs out in a panic and eventually goes to this underworld bar. They said, "What's wrong, Joe?" "I just found out. I'm the reason that Batman, I know who Batman is. I just found out that I'm the reason he became Batman." And instinctively, they all pull out their guns and shoot him for creating Batman.
Yes.
And then it's, well, maybe we should have waited until he told us who Batman.
Yes, in the Brave and Bold cartoon version, it's actually the Gotham City supervillains who pile on him, and they don't kill him, but right at the end, by an amazing freak coincidence, a piece of the roof falls in and kills him, and the Spectre's all, wow, funny how that happened, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a much better. I think that's a much better ending.
Hamill does a remarkably good job, very flat, cold, like somebody who was just a hanging judge pronouncing sentence. He's a really amazing voice actor, as you probably all know.
Well, and he seems to really enjoy it. I mean, if you look at his social media feed, he seems to really get into his voice acting career.
By the way, he's announced he's not going to do the Joker anymore.
Oh,
well,
he said, with Batman dead, crime has no punch.
yeah.
And speaking, since we're talking Spectre in the media, there was a DC short attached to one of the DC DVD movies. And again, it's pure Fleischer Aparo Spectre, even to the way the villain is.
If you remember which movie that is, after this is posted, will you put it in the comments?
Yeah, I'll look it up because I've got it. It's one of those ones I definitely do not.
Yeah, thank you. But getting back to the Superman problem for a minute. Yes. I did not remember this about Crisis on Infinite Earths, which I read as it was an ongoing. But the material I read this afternoon said that the Spectre fought the Anti-Monitor, but was extremely powered down. Is that accurate? And if it is accurate, how did you feel about it? Mickey, do you want to start?
I thought it was one of the, it's the same thing with Superman. You got to find something to slow him down or else there's no story. So I could see that, it wasn't my favorite solution, but I totally respected why they did it.
Okay. John?
I do remember the Spectre trying to stop the Anti-Monitor and failing. I don't remember why, but in the next Spectre series, which was, I do think it was the Munch and Colin one, he was essentially being punished for failing to stop the cause. And so that kind of led to somehow him merging, Corrigan coming back to life, him merging with Corrigan again, and there were limits that he could only be away from Corrigan for 24 hours.
Kind of like when Aquaman could only be out of water for an hour?
Right, or Green Lantern's ring ran out in 24 hours.
Right.
Isn't it amazing that the universe runs on our time schedule?
Isn't that handy in a writerly sort of way that it runs that way? Fraser, did you want to add anything?
I remember the scene. I think since the Anti-Monitor was like a literally universe-destroying threat, that I can accept him being in the Spectre's weight class. And then subsequently in Alan Moore's American Gothic, the Spectre goes up against the ultimate evil, the dark from before God said, let there be light. And that just swats him out of the way. Again, I can buy that. But yeah, generally finding people, that's the advantage of killing the criminals creatively. Nobody's looking at it as a fair fight. So the question of him beating up on people who are much weaker than him doesn't usually factor in. Even in the Silver Age story, there were letters coming into the letter column that, okay, how are you going to make this series work? He's too powerful. He has faced the ultimate evil. What are you going to have him fight now?
Maybe the Spectre could take on Trigon. That'd be interesting.
Now, I think that's, I think we'd have to do a series crossover and have the Spectre take on somebody like Thanos.
Yeah, that's probably more in his weight class. But I also saw something that said that in one of the more recent Crisis series, and y'all just have to forgive me because there have been so many DC crises that I can't keep them straight anymore, that the Spectre was holding off, I think it was Parallax, while the heroes set up their final push. Is that sounding familiar to anybody?
That sounds possible, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I haven't heard that.
Yeah. One of my, add before we forget. I think one of my favorite, more recent is relative when you get to my age, is the Spectre's appearances in Kingdom Come.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where
well, is there
he
anything
is.
you all want to say about that? I mean, why is it one of your favorite? And then we'll see what.
It's just the way he was the way he was drawn, the way he was presented. Basically he did not have his green boxer shorts. It was clear that all he was wearing was a robe. And he didn't really interfere. He was sort of like, there was a priest who was sort of losing faith in everything, but including the superheroes. And the Spectre basically appeared to him and said, come on, go for a walk. And the priest became our point of view into everything that was going on in Kingdom Come. So the Spectre was there, but he wasn't really interfering with things, but he acted as the voice and the medium in which to go from place to place.
He was basically the ghost of Christmas past.
Ah, good point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you want to add anything else, Mickey?
No, that's what I liked about it. It took him to a different level that he wasn't always about. That he was about faith. That vengeance is an act of faith when you think about it. So it's not always about taking vengeance. Sometimes it's just about getting your head straight. And I like that they used the priest as a way to humanize. And it kind of made a nice team take us through the story.
Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, Kingdom Come is set 20 years or so into the future. Superman, and I won't spoil too many details, has retired. Without his example, heroes are running wild. There's a whole younger generation that doesn't care about anything except beating each other up, and to hell with collateral damage. The world is getting more and more unstable. And so Superman re-enters the field and tries to stabilize things. The other heroes get involved, and the Spectre is looking to this priest for guidance. Has the world reached the point where I need to start killing people again? Where do we go? What is going to happen? And it's very effective.
By the way, this has nothing to do with the Spectre, but has there ever been a hero in any of the comic books, who called themselves collateral damage?
Not that I remember,
Not that I
no.
remember.
Yeah. I don't know why not.
There's been damage, but I don't remember collateral damage.
Yeah.
It may, I could see that being something that Savage Dragon would have. It seems like he would show up there if he was to show up anywhere.
Yeah. All you comic book creators and companies, if you decide to do a hero called Collateral Damage, I want to cut.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit. We've talked about what you all really liked about the Spectre. What is your least favorite Spectre story arc? Fraser, will you start?
I tried reading the Doug Mensch, Gene Colan arc, which I think it was John mentioned. Doug Mensch is very hit or miss with me, and most of his 80s stuff was miss. I could not get into it, and I think I dropped it well before the unsatisfying ending. That, plus the tail end of the Silver Age Spectre, they eventually started doing things like he screws up, so God announces, arbitrarily, I will take away one of your senses each issue, thus making it harder for you to fight people and making it easier to write the stories. He did not phrase it like that. That didn't work, so he wound up being basically host of a horror anthology like Cain or Abel. Those would be my nadir points for the Spectre.
Okay, Mickey?
For me, it was in the 60s, and as much as I love Neil Adams, and I love seeing that he did those early issues, it just felt like it was a second-rate superhero comic, where he was just the villains just didn't seem very effective, didn't seem up to his level, and so those are the ones I didn't like.
Okay, John?
Again, the 1967 Spectre series, toward the end, I'm not sure, because I never really bothered to look, but I think they wound up redoing the old Destiny comics, where where Destiny of the Endless, well, wasn't of the Endless, but Destiny had the book chained to his wrist, and he would simply read it and then tell us what, this person here is going to have some problems. Let's watch what happens to him. And this basically for the last maybe 3 issues of the Spectre, of the 1967 Spectre. That's what they were doing. The Spectre screwed up somehow, or maybe he refused to do something, and God punished him by making him a page story.
Actually, I have a question for Fraser and John. I never read the ones with Madame Xanadu. I never really understood that storyline.
That was the Mensch and Colin ones. The Spectre, as the Spectre and not Corrigan, was falling in love with Madame Xanadu. In fact, you want to talk controversy, and Fraser knows what this is. They did one in which the Spectre decided that for one day, no one would be killed.
Yes.
And he needed to get energy to do this. And he got the energy from being in bed with Madame Xanadu, and there was nudity that was not covered up.
I didn't remember that, but I don't doubt you're right.
Yeah, and in fact, at the time, I had a subscription to the Spectre, and they sent this issue and a note with the next issue, because they don't know who's this. The note with the following issue was there was nudity in the last one. We're very sorry about that, and we're going to make sure that it never happens again, at least in subscription issue. So, but yeah, it was. I mean, we're not talking full frontal, but we're talking Madame Xanadu was topless.
More than the lump in Dream Girl's bed that caused them.
And writhing. Yeah. Pardon? They weren't too upset about the Spectre turning somebody into glass and hitting with a hammer. But God forbid you see naked.
Sex is always worse than violence in the media. And Madame Xanadu also shows up in the Ostrander Mandrake series as a supporting character. There had been some retcons done to her in there by Matt Wagner, and they're incorporated too.
Well, speaking of supporting characters, which supporting characters do you like from the different Spectre runs? Mickey, will you start?
Well, one thing I loved about that series with Fleischer and Aparo was how Corrigan fell in love. And he wanted to have a normal life like anybody would. He wanted to be free of having to, constantly turn into the Spectre and dole out vengeance. And, if anything, he got over it. He was like, I want to have a regular life. And I love that he came so close to it. It was heartbreaking that it didn't work out. But the relationship that he had with the woman, and whose name I'm blanking on at the moment.
Gwen Sterling.
Thank you. I thought that was really nicely done. And if anything, I felt like that was the way you handle the characters, have them constantly striving for their humanity.
Yeah.
John, what about you?
Well, Gwen was interesting, but she was basically the girlfriend. And we've talked about that in other ones. But I like the priest. I can't remember his name, but I really liked the priest. He was a very well-rounded, well-founded character. And I think Fraser said he had come from the Suicide Squad, and he was sort of like the chaplain of the Suicide Squad, if you can imagine that. And so he was used to weird stuff happening. He's the perfect choice. And I think toward the end, he switched over to the Episcopalians because they weren't as fussy as the Roman Catholics. But I liked him. There really was there's no other character who stood out to me. Although I did in the Hal Jordan Spectre, there was this young girl that he adopted as sort of a daughter. And she was a very interesting character because she had adventures all her own, which basically caused Hal to intervene in them. But that was good.
Okay. Fraser, what about you?
Again, the priest, Father Andrew, I think was his name. Also, the Ostrander series, they developed Corrigan enough. He's a supporting character. And because they're exploring the Spectre as a former angel, Archangel Michael puts in a few appearances. There's one, I've been rereading it on the app, and there's one story where the Spectre goes up to heaven briefly, and as he's leaving, Michael says, "You could come up a few more times when there's not an emergency. Some of us miss you." And it was just a nice little detail.
Yeah, that I like that relationship. There was one in which an old friend of the Spectre was dying, and he wasn't sure if he was going to get into heaven. And so the Spectre goes up to plead his case. This guy standing there, and Michael is just looking at it, listening but not responding. All of a sudden, the door opens just a crack. And Michael said, "It seems you have friends." And I think that friend was Gwen Sterling. But he says, if the door opens, even a crack, you may enter. And the person says, the Spectre says something. No, the door opens first, and then he says, if the door opens a crack, it's still open, you may enter. And Michael says to Spectre, "It seems at least you have at least one friend." And the guy turns to the Spectre and says, "And now you have it."
Oh, cool.
So that was a very fair. I can't it's been so long since I read it. You'll have to.
Well, I mean, that's a problem. We're all living lives while we get ready for these panels. We don't have time to go back and read decades worth of comic books, even if we have access to them.
Darn it.
But speaking of just the girlfriend, it reminded me, this is not Spectre, but of Silver St. Cloud in Batman and Detective, because she really was just the girlfriend, but she made a huge difference in Bruce Wayne's life in the time that she was in the book. And also, speaking of just the girlfriend, didn't Jean Loring, Ray Palmer, the Adams girlfriend, become Eclipso at some point and get into it with Spectre?
No. I think she did, yes.
Yes. Okay, what happened in Brad Meltzer, the novelist, wrote an incredibly half-witted, terrible series called Identity Crisis, in which Elongated Man's wife is fridged, and then we learn retroactively she was rape fridged. And then it turns out Jean Loring is barking dog insane, which strangely enough did not show up in any of her appearances in the series. And then she goes nuts, and then later she gets to become the new host for the Eclipso Fallen Angel. I have
Tell us how you really felt about it, Fraser.
Yeah.
I am not in favor of it, particularly since Jean Loring was one of the better love interests of the Silver Age. They were affectionate. She's intelligent. She has a career. They obviously weren't sleeping in twin beds when they were off panel. And I thought it was a waste of her. Plus, the whole Sue Dibney thing, plus a lot of other stuff. And I'll stop now because I could take a whole hour and talk about the flaws of Identity Crisis. And that's not what we're here for.
No.
Well, actually, we are coming up close on time. So this is the point where I say, is there anything that we have not talked about the Spectre that anybody wants to touch on before we close out?
I really enjoyed the 2015 series Gotham by Midnight, which was a different take on the Spectre. Jim Corrigan was basically the Twilight Squad, ran the Twilight Squad, investigating the weird supernatural crap that happened in Gotham. and they did very well incorporating the Spectre into that. It's basically, look, if this continues, he's going to show up, and you don't want him to show up. Plus, Batman was in it.
I would say, despite my criticism, well, all our criticisms of the Silver Age Spectre, the Neil Adams issues stand out because he was working to try to make them something other than raw power. There's one where Wildcat is having to deal as a subplot with the fact that he is a superhero, and he's getting old, and it's taking its toll. There is one where the Spectre, where it comes down to, will the Spectre kill an innocent person to save the world? And so it's a moral question that can't be decided just by his power. Adams was doing remarkable work even back then, even though I didn't appreciate it as a kid. I'm sorry, Mr. Adams.
Mickey, did you want to add anything?
Just that how many great artists have worked on it. Like you said, Adams, Aparo, Colin, Gray Murrow. And I think my favorite was one story that Richard Corbin did. And I'm a big Underground comic books fan, so I loved him ever since he was in doing Underground comics. And his one shot of Spectre was so spooky. It really took on the horror aspect of it, and he was the perfect artist for it.
Okay. Anything else anybody wants to add before we do our roundup?
I'm good. Just,
yeah.
If you're going to commit crime, beware the Spectre and stay out of logging mills.
All right. Well, then that's a good transition to where can people find you? Fraser, will you start?
Yes, I am Fraser Sherman, Fraser. I am at frasersherman.com, which is my website / blog. And my books are available on Amazon and most other sites. I also blog currently about working through rereading the Silver Age over at Atomic Junk Shop. I will be getting to a Spectre-related post probably in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. And when that happens, this should post about that time on the Continual page. So if you want to go into the comments and put the link to that, that would be good. You all are always welcome to do anything like that. Mickey, what about you?
You can find me at my website, mickey.dubrow.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, and my books can be found on Amazon or bookshop.org or any place where you can order books.
And John?
You can find my books on Amazon, or again, any place that sells books online. Remarkably, Walmart is one of them. I'm on Facebook as John French, and I have an author's page on Facebook on L French.
Okay, well, you can find me at nancynorthcott.com. My next release is actually a holiday-themed short story, White Lace, Holly, and Magic. That's a follow-up to one of my Like Mage Wars series books. You can also find me, at least for the time being, on X, where I'm at Nancy Northcott, on Blue Sky, where I'm at Nancy North, and I'm not on Facebook much, and I'm most active there on my street team, which has the extremely imaginative name of Nancy Northcott Street Team.
Whoa.
So on that note, thank you to everyone on the panel for this discussion. Thank you to everyone who's watching. And thank you to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information about them, visit heroesonline.com.
And Nancy, thank you for letting us do this panel.
Yes,
you're welcome. It was fun for me.
Thank you.
Thank you. And